He rescued two Apache women freezing to death. What the women said left the cowboy stunned. The cold wind cut through the plains like a knife, making every inch of exposed skin sting with frost. The snow crunched beneath the cowboy's boots as he walked beside his horse, leading it carefully along the narrow trail. He had been riding this land for years, and he knew every ridge, every dip, and every hidden danger that the vast wilderness could throw at him. Yet today, the winter felt harsher than usual. The sky was a dull gray, heavy with clouds that promised even more snow. The cowboy tightened his coat around his chest, pulled his hat low over his eyes, and kept moving. He had a long journey ahead, and he could not afford to slow down. He was a man of few words, but his mind was always alert. The harsh life of the frontier had taught him to read the signs of nature, to notice the subtle hints that might indicate danger. A broken branch here, a faint trail there, everything mattered. He trusted his instincts, honed by years of experience, and it had kept him alive in countless situations where others might not have survived. The horse, a strong and patient animal, followed him without hesitation. Together they moved as one, silent but aware, moving steadily through the endless expanse of snow-covered land. Despite the cold, the cowboy felt a strange calmness. The wilderness had a way of quieting the mind, forcing a man to focus on the present moment. The snowflakes swirled around him, landing gently on his coat, melting instantly in the warmth of his body. He could see the distant mountains, their peaks barely visible through the haze of falling snow, and he felt the familiar mix of awe and respect for the land he called home. Life out here was not easy. It demanded strength, patience, and courage. But the cowboy had all three in abundance. He had survived winters that seemed impossible, storms that had buried the world in white, and nights so cold that even the fire seemed to shiver. As he rode deeper into the plains, he noticed a strange silence. Normally, the wind carried the faint sounds of the land, birds calling to one another, the distant howl of a coyote, the soft rustle of trees, but today there was nothing. Even the horse seemed uneasy, stamping its feet and snorting softly. The cowboy paused, listening carefully. His eyes scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of movement. That's when he saw it, a faint, almost imperceptible shadow moving in the distance. It was small and low to the ground, and at first he thought it might be an animal, perhaps a coyote or a fox struggling through the deep snow. But something about it didn't feel right. The shadow moved erratically, almost like it was struggling to stay upright. The cowboy's heart quickened slightly. He had seen animals trapped in snow before, but the movements of this shadow were too deliberate, too human. Without hesitation, he spurred his horse forward, moving closer to investigate. The wind howled around him, carrying the scent of snow and ice, but he did not slow down. He had learned long ago that hesitation in the wilderness could be dangerous. Whatever was out there needed help, and he intended to find it before it was too late. As he approached, the shapes became clearer. Two figures were lying on the ground, their bodies curled up against the cold, trying to conserve what little heat they had left. Their clothes were thin and ragged, offering almost no protection against the freezing temperatures. Snow had clung to their hair and shoulders, and their breath came in shallow, shaky gasps. The cowboy's chest tightened as he realized the severity of their condition. These were not animals. These were human beings, women, struggling to survive in a world that had already been cruel to them. The cowboy dismounted quickly, securing his horse to a nearby tree. He moved closer, keeping his voice low and calm. "Hey there," he called softly. "You're going to be okay. I'm here to help." The women stirred slightly but did not respond immediately. They were too weak, too cold, and perhaps too afraid. One of them tried to lift her head, but her hands trembled violently. The other lay still, her body almost completely buried in the snow, and the cowboy feared for a moment that she might already have slipped away. Without thinking, he dropped to his knees beside them. He knew that every second mattered. Cold worked fast, and if he didn't act quickly, he could lose them both. He began to clear the snow from around their bodies, brushing it away with careful, deliberate movements. His hands were numb from the cold, but he ignored the pain. He wrapped them in the thick blankets he always carried, the kind he used when traveling through the harshest winters. He placed one under their bodies and draped the other over their shoulders, trying to trap whatever heat remained in their fragile forms. The first woman's eyes fluttered open and the cowboy met her gaze. She was pale, almost ghostly, but her eyes held a spark of awareness. "Please help," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. The cowboy nodded, trying to offer comfort. "I've got you," he said. "You're going to be all right. Just hold on." He reached for his canteen, offering her a sip of water, and helped her sit upright against a small ridge that provided some shelter from the wind. The second woman began to stir as well. She shivered uncontrollably, her teeth chattering so violently that the sound carried over the howling wind. The cowboy held her hands, rubbing them to restore circulation, murmuring reassurances all the while. He could feel the life slowly returning to her fingers, and that small success gave him hope. They were not out of danger yet, but the first step had been taken. The women were alive, and that was all that mattered for now. As he worked, the cowboy couldn't help but wonder how they had ended up in this situation. The plains were dangerous, yes, but human beings rarely stayed out here alone in such harsh conditions. Perhaps they had been traveling and lost their way. Perhaps misfortune had forced them to wander into the snowstorm. Whatever the reason, he knew he could not ask questions yet. Survival came first. Questions could wait until they were safe. Finally, after what felt like hours but was only minutes, he managed to get both women upright on the horse. He walked alongside, keeping a steady pace, careful not to jostle them too much. The horse moved slowly but steadily, trusting its rider's guidance. The wind continued to bite at their faces, and the cold seemed to seep through every layer of clothing, but the cowboy did not falter. He had been through worse, and he knew that determination and calm could make the difference between life and death. As they moved through the snow-covered landscape, the cowboy's mind reflected on the vastness and harshness of the frontier. This land could be unforgiving, yet it had its moments of beauty. The way the sun glinted off the snow, the distant mountains rising majestically against the gray sky, the silence that settled between gusts of wind. It was a land that demanded respect, and those who ventured into it had to be brave, skilled, and resilient. The cowboy had all of those qualities, but today he was reminded that courage was not just about surviving alone. It was about helping others survive, too. By the time the sun began to dip behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, the cowboy had found a small hollow that offered some protection from the elements. He dismounted and guided the women to a sheltered spot, building a small fire with the few dry branches he had managed to gather. The flames flickered, casting warm light on their pale, tired faces. He fed them small sips of water and encouraged them to eat a little of the food he carried. Their bodies shivered, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, the warmth began to return. For the first time, the cowboy allowed himself a moment of relief. They had made it through the immediate danger. They were alive, and yet he knew that their journey was far from over. The snow would continue to fall, the nights would remain bitterly cold, and the world out here was not forgiving. But he also knew that with patience, care, and courage, they could survive. And that knowledge gave him strength, just as it had given him strength countless times before. He watched the women as they began to regain some of their energy, their eyes brighter and more alert. There was a quiet gratitude in their gaze, something that needed no words. In that moment, the cowboy understood that this was not just about saving lives. It was about connection, about the shared experience of facing something greater than oneself and coming through it together. And as the fire crackled and the snow continued to fall softly around them, He felt a deep sense of purpose, a reminder that even in the coldest, harshest places, kindness, courage, and humanity could shine through. The next morning, the cowboy woke before dawn. The air was still sharp and cold, but the snow had settled into a quiet, sparkling blanket over the plains. The two women he had rescued were wrapped in the thick blankets he had given them, huddled near the small fire that had burned through the night. Their faces were pale, but they were alive, and that brought a sense of relief he could hardly put into words. He watched them for a moment, noting the slow rise and fall of their chests, the subtle warmth returning to their fingers. They had survived the night, and for the cowboy that was already a victory. He knew the danger was far from over. The snowstorm had passed, but the cold remained, relentless and unforgiving. He had to get them to safety quickly, before the next night fell. The nearest settlement was miles away, and the trail was still treacherous, with patches of ice hidden beneath the snow and sudden drops covered in frost. He gently shook the first woman awake. "It's time to move," he said softly. She opened her eyes slowly, blinking against the morning light. Her lips were blue, and her hands trembled as she tried to sit up. The cowboy helped her, lifting her carefully and supporting her as she regained some strength. The second woman stirred as well, her eyes half closed, her movements sluggish. The cowboy guided her upright, wrapping the blankets tightly around her shoulders. He offered them both small sips of water and a bit of dry bread he had in his pack. They ate slowly, their hands shaking, but with each bite they seemed to gain a little more energy. The cowboy watched them carefully, noting the changes in their breathing, the spark returning to their eyes. He knew that keeping them moving was as important as feeding them. Standing still for too long in this cold could be dangerous. Once they were ready, he led them back to the horse. He helped the first woman climb onto the saddle, and then carefully lifted the second onto the horse behind him. He rode slowly at first, feeling the weight of responsibility more than ever. The snow crunched beneath the hooves, the wind whistling through the open plains, but he remained steady, guiding the horse with calm determination. Every step was careful, calculated. One slip could mean disaster, not just for him, but for the women who depended entirely on him. As they moved, the cowboy began to notice the signs of struggle in the women's bodies. Their arms were thin and weak, their legs trembling from exhaustion. The clothes they wore were tattered and thin, unable to protect them from the harsh winter. It was clear they had been out in the cold for a long time, perhaps lost for days. The cowboy's heart tightened as he considered what they had endured. The thought of being trapped in this freezing wilderness without help made him grateful that he had arrived when he did. He silently promised himself that he would get them to safety, no matter what it took. The journey was slow, but the cowboy was patient. He knew that rushing could be fatal. He guided the horse carefully through hidden dips in the snow, over patches of ice, and around the sharp rocks that jutted through the frozen ground. Every now and then, he would stop, letting the women rest and regain their strength. He spoke to them softly, offering encouragement without pressing them for words. They were too weak to speak much, but the occasional nod, the faint squeeze of his hand, told him they understood. By mid-morning, the women had begun to speak in broken words, their voices weak but full of gratitude. The cowboy listened carefully, learning that they were traveling alone when they had become stranded in the snowstorm. They had tried to find shelter, but the wind and cold had driven them off course, leaving them lost and exposed. Their story was filled with hardship, but also with resilience. They had survived against the odds, relying on each other and sheer determination to stay alive. The cowboy felt a deep respect for their courage, realizing that he was not the only brave soul in this harsh landscape. As the hours passed, the cowboy led them through a narrow valley that offered some protection from the wind. The snow was deeper here, but the ridge on either side blocked the worst of the gusts. He dismounted to clear the path where it was treacherous, breaking through ice and snow to create a safer trail for the horse. The women rode silently behind him, their faces pale but gradually regaining color. He offered them water at intervals, letting them sip slowly, careful not to overwhelm their bodies. The smallest details mattered in situations like this. Even a slight misstep could mean disaster. During a brief rest, the cowboy noticed something in the distance, a thin trail of smoke rising from the horizon. His heart lifted. It meant there was life nearby, perhaps a settlement, perhaps other travelers who could offer help. He encouraged the women, pointing toward the smoke. "That's where we're headed," he said, "just a little further. You're safe now." Their eyes brightened, and for the first time since he had found them, they smiled faintly. The expression was weak but genuine, and it filled him with renewed energy. The closer they got to the smoke, the more careful the cowboy became. The snow had hidden many hazards, and he knew that visibility could be tricky. Hidden ice, deep drifts, or fallen branches could throw the horse off balance. He moved slowly, testing each step, adjusting his route as needed. The women trusted him completely, and he could feel their reliance on his judgment pressing on his shoulders. But he welcomed it. He had always thrived under responsibility. This was not just about surviving himself anymore. It was about guiding others through danger, and he took that duty seriously. By late afternoon, the cowboy guided the horse into a small clearing, sheltered by tall pine trees that broke the wind. He helped the women dismount, offering his arms to support them. They had regained some strength, but their legs were still weak, and he wanted to ensure they didn't collapse. They huddled near a patch of sunlight that had broken through the clouds, letting its warmth seep into their chilled bodies. The cowboy took this moment to prepare a small fire, using dry branches he had collected earlier. The flames flickered to life, providing heat and comfort, and the women wrapped themselves more tightly in the blankets he had brought. As the fire crackled, the women began to speak more freely, their words coming in hesitant bursts. They thanked him repeatedly, their gratitude evident in their trembling voices. The cowboy listened quietly, offering nods and soft reassurances. He knew they had been through a terrifying ordeal, and he wanted them to feel that their survival was a shared triumph. Every word of thanks, every tear shed quietly into the snow, reminded him why he had acted without hesitation when he had first found them. The conversation slowly shifted from gratitude to stories of who they were. They spoke of their families, their home, and the life they had left behind. Even in the midst of hardship, they shared memories that brought small smiles to their faces. The cowboy listened intently, realizing that these women were not just victims of circumstance. They were strong, resilient, and brave. Their survival depended on their courage and determination as much as it depended on his help. This realization deepened his respect for them, and he felt a connection forming that transcended the language and cultural differences between them. Night began to fall, and the temperature dropped even further. The cowboy knew they could not stay exposed for long. He urged the women to rest while he prepared the area for a safer night's shelter. He used extra blankets, rocks, and snow to create a windbreak, and he ensured the fire would continue to burn without spreading into the surrounding trees. The women shivered as they settled into their makeshift bedding, but they trusted him completely. The cowboy felt a quiet pride in the small victory. They were alive together and moving toward safety. As he watched them, he reflected on the day's journey. The discovery of the two women had turned what might have been an ordinary ride across the plains into a test of skill, patience, and courage. He had guided them through freezing conditions, tended to their injuries, and offered reassurance when fear and despair threatened to overwhelm them. And yet, it had been their bravery that truly impressed him. Despite exhaustion, cold, and hunger, they had fought to survive, trusting a stranger when their options were gone. Before he allowed himself to rest, the cowboy checked the fire one last time and adjusted the blankets around the women. Their eyes were closed, but their breathing was steadier, warmer, and stronger than it had been that morning. He felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. They had made it through another day, and tomorrow would bring them closer to safety. He mounted his horse once more, patrolling the area for any hidden dangers, ensuring the women would not face any surprises in the night. When he finally settled beside the fire, the snow falling softly around them, he allowed himself a brief moment of rest. He knew the journey was far from over. The plains were vast, and the nearest settlement was still many miles away. But for now, they were alive. They were together, and they had taken the first crucial steps toward safety. In the quiet of the snowy night, with the crackling fire and the gentle breathing of the women beside him, the cowboy felt a deep sense of purpose. He had acted without hesitation, guided by instinct, courage, and compassion. And in doing so, he had given two lives a chance to continue against all odds. The next morning, the cowboy woke to a world covered in frost and silence. The wind had calmed, but the cold remained sharp, biting at any exposed skin. He looked at the two women huddled near the fire, still wrapped in blankets, their faces showing both exhaustion and resilience. They had slept through most of the night, conserving their energy, but he knew that the journey ahead would be even more difficult. The plains were endless and the path to safety was treacherous. He mounted his horse carefully, checking the ground for hidden ice, and gestured to the women to climb on. The first woman, still shivering, gripped the saddle tightly as he helped her up. The second woman leaned on him for support, her legs weak and trembling. He adjusted the blankets around them, making sure they were secure, and slowly guided the horse forward. Every step was cautious. The snow beneath the hooves was unpredictable, hiding patches of ice and deep drifts that could throw them off balance. He moved deliberately, his eyes scanning the horizon for danger, knowing that one misstep could undo all the progress they had made. As they rode, the cowboy felt the weight of responsibility more than ever. The women depended entirely on him for survival. He had rescued them, yes, but now he had to keep them alive through the harsh winter conditions, across miles of unforgiving land. The wind whistled across the plains, carrying the sharp scent of snow and ice. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows that danced across the drifts. Each moment was tense, each movement critical. He guided the horse around hidden obstacles, using his experience to find the safest path through the snow-covered terrain. The women tried to speak, but their voices were weak and hoarse. They thanked him quietly, their words soft but heartfelt. The cowboy nodded, offering small reassurances. He did not need their words to know their gratitude. Every glance, every small gesture told him they were aware of how much he was risking for them. He felt a strange bond forming, a connection built not on language or culture, but on shared struggle and survival. In the middle of the frozen wilderness, trust had become their most valuable possession. Hours passed, and the journey became increasingly difficult. The snow deepened in some areas, forcing the horse to trudge through knee-high drifts. The cowboy dismounted at times, breaking a path with his boots to make it easier for the animal. His own body ached from the cold, the effort, and the constant tension, but he ignored it. There was no room for weakness. The women were relying on him, and he could not afford to falter. He spoke softly to them as they rode, encouraging them to hold on, reminding them that they were safe as long as he was with them. At midday, the wind picked up again, stronger and sharper than before. Snow swirled around them, reducing visibility to just a few feet. The horse snorted nervously, stamping its hooves. The cowboy pulled his coat tighter and urged the horse forward with calm determination. He knew they could not stop. Even a short delay could leave the women exposed to the cold long enough to risk serious harm. He kept moving, careful to avoid icy patches and hidden crevices, guiding the animal with steady hands and a watchful eye. As they reached a narrow canyon, the challenges grew worse. The walls of the canyon rose high on either side, and the snow had drifted into deep pockets, making the footing treacherous. The horse slipped slightly on a patch of ice, and the cowboy quickly steadied it, whispering reassurances to both the animal and the women. "It's okay," he murmured. "We're almost through." His own heart pounded in his chest, but he maintained a calm exterior. Panic could be deadly here. He focused on the path ahead, carefully navigating the horse through the tight space. At one point, the first woman nearly lost her balance, her hands gripping the saddle so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The cowboy reached back, steadying her with a strong hand. "You're safe," he said gently. "Just hold on a little longer." She nodded, trusting him completely, and adjusted her position. The second woman leaned closer to him, shivering uncontrollably. He wrapped an extra blanket around her shoulders, rubbing her arms to restore warmth. The cold was relentless, and every second mattered. Yet through it all, the women held on, their determination shining through the exhaustion and fear. By late afternoon, the canyon opened onto a small plateau, giving them a brief respite from the worst of the wind. The sun, low and weak, cast long shadows across the snow, and the temperature, though still cold, was slightly less punishing. The cowboy led the horse to a sheltered spot and helped the women dismount. He built a small fire, careful to shield it from the wind, and offered them water and small bites of food. They ate slowly, their hands shaking, but with each mouthful they regained a bit more strength. The cowboy watched them carefully, knowing that even a minor misstep could undo their progress. As they rested, the women began to share more of their story. They spoke of how they had been traveling through the wilderness to visit family in a nearby settlement when a sudden snowstorm had forced them off course. They had tried to find shelter in abandoned cabins and under rocks, but nothing had protected them from the cold. They described the fear of being alone, exposed to the elements, and unsure if anyone would come to help. The cowboy listened quietly, nodding as they spoke, impressed by their courage and resilience. Despite everything, they had survived and their spirit had not been broken. The cowboy's mind wandered briefly to the journey that lay ahead. The settlement they were aiming for was still far away, and night would come soon. He knew that the next few hours would be critical. He prepared the horse, checking the harness and the path ahead, making sure they could continue safely. The women wrapped themselves tightly in blankets, their eyes reflecting a mixture of fatigue and determination. They trusted him completely, and he felt the weight of that trust pressing on him. But he welcomed it. He had faced harsh conditions before, and guiding others through danger was a challenge he was ready to meet. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a pale orange glow across the snow. The wind picked up again, carrying sharp gusts that cut through their clothing and chilled them to the bone. The cowboy mounted the horse, helping the women up, and urged the animal forward. Every step was careful, deliberate. The path ahead was uneven and hidden by snow, but he had faced worse. He guided the horse through drifts and around icy patches, speaking softly to the women to calm their fears. They leaned on him, trusting him completely, and he focused on keeping that trust intact. Night fell fully, and the cold deepened. Stars twinkled faintly above, but the darkness was oppressive, hiding the dangers of the terrain. The cowboy could feel the snow seeping through the blankets, chilling the women despite their careful wrapping. He pushed onward, knowing that stopping too soon could be dangerous. His own body ached, but he ignored it, concentrating on the path and the safety of those who depended on him. The horse moved steadily, guided by the cowboy's experienced hand and careful attention. Finally, in the distance, a faint glow appeared, the warm light of a fire or a settlement. The cowboy's heart lifted. They were close to safety, but he did not allow himself to relax. The final stretch was just as dangerous as the first. He guided the horse with precision, making sure the women were steady and protected. Each step brought them closer to warmth, shelter, and life beyond the frozen wilderness. and as they moved, he felt a sense of satisfaction mixed with relief. They had survived another day, facing the harshest elements together. The cowboy paused for a moment, letting the women rest once more near a small cluster of trees that provided some shelter from the wind. He checked the horse, adjusted the blankets, and ensured the fire would continue to burn. The women were pale but alive, their eyes reflecting gratitude and a growing sense of hope. He knew that the final challenges were still ahead, but they were strong enough to face them. And as the wind howled through the trees and snow drifted softly around them, the cowboy realized that courage, determination, and care had carried them this far, and would carry them the rest of the way. The sky was a deep shade of purple as twilight settled over the snow-covered plains. The cold was sharp, but the wind had softened, giving the cowboy a small reprieve. He had led the two women through endless drifts and hidden dangers, and finally it seemed that safety was within reach. They had made it past the most treacherous stretches of the wilderness, but he knew that the journey was far from over. Exhaustion weighed heavily on all of them, yet the women seemed determined, clinging to the hope that each step brought them closer to warmth and shelter. As they walked the final stretch toward a faint light in the distance, the first woman spoke, her voice trembling but clear. We owe you our lives," she said softly, looking up at the cowboy with eyes that glistened from the cold and emotion. The words were simple, yet they carried weight that seemed to settle over the plain like a blanket. The cowboy nodded quietly, keeping his gaze forward. He had risked his life to help them, yes, but he had never expected such words. There was humility in their tone, a recognition of courage and trust that he had not demanded, and it struck something deep inside him. The second woman, sitting carefully behind him on the horse, spoke next. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried a story within it. "We thought no one would come," she admitted. "We were lost and cold and certain." Her voice broke, and she inhaled sharply, trying to steady herself. The cowboy tightened his grip on the reins, feeling the raw weight of her words. They had endured a fear so complete that it had threatened to take their lives, and yet they had survived long enough to speak these truths to him. In that moment, he understood the depth of their ordeal, not just the physical struggle, but the emotional battle against despair that they had fought every second of their journey. He stopped the horse for a moment, letting them breathe and steady themselves. The firelight from a distant cabin flickered faintly through the trees, promising warmth and refuge. He turned slightly to look at the women, who were huddled under the blankets, shivering but alive. "You're safe now," he said softly. "You've made it this far and the rest is just ahead. You don't have to be afraid anymore." Their eyes held gratitude but also something else, something he had not expected: recognition. They were seeing not just a man, but someone who had risked everything to ensure they survived. And in return, he felt a profound respect for them, for their courage, and for the way they had endured the wilderness together. Then the first woman spoke again, and this time her words startled him. We have a gift for you," she said. The cowboy blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. A gift? In this harsh landscape, with survival barely assured, he could not imagine what they might mean. She hesitated, looking toward the second woman for encouragement, and then continued. "It's not gold, not food, it's something that belongs to our people. It is a blessing. We want you to have it for saving our lives." The cowboy's eyebrows rose slightly. He had helped them out of duty, out of instinct, and certainly not for reward. Yet their sincerity was clear, and he felt a mixture of curiosity and humility at what they intended to offer. The second woman leaned forward, her hands shaking slightly as she reached into the folds of her blanket. She produced a small object, carefully wrapped in leather. "It is a symbol of our people," she said. "It carries protection, guidance, and gratitude. Please accept it not as payment but as recognition of what you have done." The cowboy took the object with careful hands, feeling its weight and the significance behind it. It was a delicate piece, simple yet beautiful, crafted with care. As he held it, he felt a connection, a bond that went beyond words or culture, binding him to these women in a moment that would stay with him forever. For a few moments, silence fell over the trio. The wind had dropped to a soft whisper, and the faint glow of the cabin grew closer. The women's eyes reflected a mix of relief and wonder, as if they could scarcely believe that they had survived the cold, the fear, and the endless miles. The cowboy looked at them, and for the first time he allowed himself to feel the weight of what had happened. He had acted without hesitation when he had found them, guided them through danger, and now, in this quiet twilight, he realized the depth of the impact of his actions. Their survival was a testament not just to his courage, but to theirs. Then the first woman spoke again, and her words sent a shiver through him, not from cold but from astonishment. We knew someone would come for us," she said slowly. "Not just anyone, someone brave, strong, and kind. Someone who could see us through the storm. We never imagined it would be you, but now we know that the spirits guided you here." The cowboy swallowed, unsure how to respond. He had never thought in terms of spirits or destiny, yet he could not deny the feeling that had accompanied him since he had first seen them in the snow. The encounter felt larger than chance, as though the land itself had conspired to bring them together at the precise moment they needed help. The second woman added quietly, "We have seen many winters, many storms, but we have never encountered someone like you. You risked yourself, gave us hope, and helped us stand again when we could not. That is a gift greater than any treasure. We will never forget it." The cowboy felt a lump in his throat. He had always considered himself a simple man, living by instinct, experience, and the code of survival on the plains. Praise was unusual for him, and gratitude of this depth was rare. Yet hearing it, seeing the sincerity in their eyes, he felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire between them. It was the warmth of connection, humanity, and mutual respect. For a long moment, the cowboy remained silent, letting their words sink in. He thought about the dangers he had faced, the nights spent guiding them through snow and ice, the fear he had glimpsed in their eyes, and how they had endured it all. Their strength and determination were as remarkable as his own, and he realized that courage came in many forms. He had relied on his skills, his experience, and his resolve to protect them. They had relied on their trust, their hope, and their resilience to survive. Together, they had created something extraordinary in the middle of the harsh, frozen plains. Then the first woman smiled faintly, the color returning to her pale cheeks. "We cannot repay you," she said, "but we can honor you. That is why we give this to you, to remind you that kindness, courage, and compassion are never wasted. What you did, it matters." The second woman nodded in agreement, her eyes shining. The cowboy held the small token carefully, feeling its significance in a way that went beyond words. It was a reminder of life, of survival, and of the unexpected bonds that form in the most difficult circumstances. As the glow of the distant cabin grew brighter, the cowboy guided the women closer, still careful of the snow and uneven ground. Their steps were slower now, but their determination had not wavered. Every movement was careful, deliberate, and filled with purpose. He felt a sense of pride that was quiet and deep, not in himself alone, but in the resilience of those he had saved. They were alive, moving forward, and their spirits had not been broken by the harshness of the land or the cruelty of the cold. By the time they reached the clearing where the cabin stood, the women were smiling faintly, exhausted but relieved. The cowboy helped them dismount, ensuring they were steady before he led the horse closer. He carried the small token carefully, feeling it as a symbol of their trust and gratitude. The cabin's door opened, and a warm light spilled out, inviting them into shelter, warmth, and safety. The women paused for a moment, looking back at the plains, the snow, and the horizon. Then they turned to the cowboy, their eyes full of appreciation and something more, a recognition that this encounter had changed all of them forever. The first woman placed a gentle hand on his arm. "You saved us," she said softly, "and because of that, we will never forget you. Not just the survival, but the courage, the patience, and the heart you showed. We are stunned and we are grateful, more than words can ever tell." The second woman echoed the sentiment, her voice choked with emotion. "You are part of our story now." "Always." The cowboy nodded, swallowing back emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. He had acted without hesitation, guided by instinct, skill, and compassion. And now, in the twilight of this extraordinary day, he understood the full weight of what had occurred. For the first time since the snowstorm, he allowed himself a deep breath. The women were safe, alive, and strong enough to continue. The token they had given him rested in his hand, a reminder of the unexpected, profound gratitude that had left him stunned. It was more than he had ever expected from his simple act of helping those in need. And in that quiet moment, as the firelight from the cabin warmed their faces and the plains lay silent around them, the cowboy realized that heroism was not measured in fame or recognition, but in moments like this, moments of trust, courage, and shared survival that would linger. In memory forever, the cabin door creaked open, and the warm light spilled onto the snow-covered ground. Inside, a small fire crackled in the hearth, casting a golden glow across the wooden walls. The cowboy led the two women carefully inside, helping them remove the layers of snow-covered blankets and coats. Their hands were still numb, but the warmth of the cabin began to seep into their bodies, and a sense of relief replaced the constant tension that had gripped them for days. The smell of wood smoke and the faint scent of cooked food filled the air, grounding them in the safety they had longed for throughout their perilous journey. The women sat near the fire, their bodies slowly thawing. Their hands rubbed against the warmth, their cheeks regaining color as the cold melted away. The cowboy stayed close, making sure they were comfortable and that the fire would remain steady. He offered them sips of warm tea and small pieces of bread, allowing their stomachs to adjust after days of minimal food. Each bite and sip seemed to restore not just their bodies but their spirits. For the first time in days, they could sit quietly without fear of collapsing into the snow, without wondering if the next step would be their last. As they rested, the cowboy placed the small token the women had given him on the table. Its significance was clear to him now more than ever. It was more than a gift. It was a symbol of trust, courage, and connection. The women watched him, eyes still filled with gratitude, and he felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the fire. It was a rare feeling, one born from knowing he had made a difference, that he had given them life when all seemed lost. "You saved us," the first woman said again, her voice calm but full of emotion. "More than that, you gave us hope. We will carry it with us always." The second woman nodded, adding, "We will tell our people about you. They will know that there are those who risk themselves to save others, even in the coldest, harshest times." The cowboy listened quietly, humbled by their words. He had acted out of instinct and compassion, not for recognition, and yet their gratitude touched him in ways that no reward ever could. For a few moments, they sat in silence, the fire crackling between them. The cowboy thought about the journey they had endured, the snowstorms, the deep drifts, the treacherous cliffs and icy paths. He remembered the fear in the women's eyes when he first found them, their exhaustion and their quiet determination to survive. And now, seeing them safe and slowly regaining their strength, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. They had endured the worst together, and that shared experience had created a bond that would never fade. The women began to speak more about their lives, sharing stories of their families and their community. They described their village, the traditions they cherished, and the people they loved. The cowboy listened attentively, fascinated by their resilience and the way they valued each small thing in life. Their words reminded him of his own past, of the importance of family, community, and the connections that gave life meaning. It was clear that these women were more than survivors. They were strong, courageous, and full of wisdom. As the evening wore on, the cowboy helped them settle for the night. He set up blankets near the fire, ensuring they were warm and safe. The women thanked him repeatedly, but he simply nodded, offering small smiles and reassurances. Sleep was coming slowly to them, but the comfort of the cabin, the warmth of the fire, and the sense of safety allowed them to relax for the first time in days. The cowboy himself took a moment to rest, reflecting on the events that had brought them together. He realized that moments like this, moments of courage, trust, and human connection, were the true measure of a person's life. The next morning, the women awoke to find the cowboy preparing a small breakfast. They were stronger now, their bodies recovering from the exposure and exhaustion of the previous days. As they ate, the cowboy explained that the nearest town was still a day's ride away, but that they would reach it safely. The women listened intently, nodding as they gathered the courage to continue the journey. They had survived the wilderness together, and now the path to safety seemed almost easy in comparison. Before they left, the first woman handed the cowboy a small bundle. "We want you to have this," she said, her eyes shining. Inside was another token, simple but meaningful, representing the gratitude and respect of their people. The cowboy accepted it humbly, understanding that it was not just a gift, but a symbol of the bond formed through shared struggle. "Thank you," he said quietly. "It means more than you know." The women smiled, their expressions filled with warmth and relief. Mounting the horse once again, the cowboy guided the women out of the cabin and onto the snow-covered trail. The journey to the town was still long, but it no longer felt daunting. The women rode with steadier hands, their bodies stronger, and their spirits lifted by the safety and care they had received. The cowboy moved at a steady pace, careful but calm, knowing that they were almost free from the harshest elements of the wilderness. The snow crunched beneath the horses' hooves, the air was clear, and the sky was brightening with the promise of a new day. Along the way, the women began to speak more freely, sharing stories and laughter for the first time since the snowstorm. Their voices carried across the plains, light and joyful, a stark contrast to the fear and despair they had faced just days before. The cowboy listened, smiling quietly to himself. He realized that the journey had changed them all, not just the women, but him as well. They had faced fear, danger, and exhaustion, yet they had survived together. That shared experience had created a bond stronger than words could describe. By midday, they reached the outskirts of the town. The women's faces lit up with relief as they spotted familiar buildings, and the sight of people moving about, safe and warm. The cowboy guided the horse slowly, ensuring they arrived without incident. As they approached the town, the women turned to him, their eyes filled with gratitude and emotion. "We are safe now," the first woman said softly, "because of you." The second woman added, "We will never forget this day. You are part of our story forever." The cowboy nodded, feeling the depth of their words. He helped the women dismount and guided them to the warmth of a nearby inn. They were safe now, in a place where food, fire, and care awaited them. The women turned to the cowboy once more, offering thanks and hugs. For a moment, silence hung between them, filled with the understanding of everything they had endured together. It was a quiet, profound moment, a recognition of survival, courage, and the unexpected bonds that had formed in the face of danger. After ensuring they were settled, the cowboy mounted his horse one last time. He looked back at the women, now safe and strong, and felt a sense of quiet pride. He had acted without hesitation, guided by instinct and compassion, and in doing so, he had given them a chance to live. But more than that, he had shared something deeper, a connection forged through adversity, trust, and humanity. As he rode away, the town growing smaller behind him, he knew that this experience would stay with him forever. The women watched him leave, their hearts filled with gratitude and respect. They had survived the wilderness, the cold, and the fear of being lost forever. They had been rescued by a man who risked everything for strangers, and in return, they had shared their trust, their stories, and their lives. It was a bond that could never be broken, a moment in time that would live on in memory and story. They smiled at each other, knowing that they had faced one of the greatest challenges of their lives and come through together, stronger than before. The cowboy rode on, the snow-covered plains stretching out before him. The wind was calm and the sky was clear, reflecting the promise of new beginnings. He thought of the women, of their courage, and of the unexpected gift they had given him, not just the token, but the gift of gratitude, trust, and human connection. It was a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, kindness, courage, and compassion could shine through. And as he disappeared into the horizon, he carried with him the quiet knowledge that he had made a difference in the lives of two remarkable women, and that their story would remain a part of his forever. The snow glistened under the afternoon sun as the cowboy rode, each step steady and purposeful. He reflected on the journey, the struggle against nature, the fear and uncertainty, and the moments of shared triumph that had carried them all through. He realized that life on the frontier was not just about survival. It was about connection, trust, and the courage to act when others needed you most. The women had taught him as much as he had helped them, and that understanding filled him with a quiet sense of fulfillment. By evening, the cowboy had returned to his own cabin, the plains now calm and silent around him. He placed the tokens the women had given him on a small shelf, a reminder of the journey, the gratitude, and the bond that had been formed. He sat by his fire, letting the warmth seep into his body, reflecting on everything that had happened. The experience had changed him in ways he could not yet fully understand, but he knew one thing with certainty: courage, kindness, and compassion were never wasted, and the bonds formed in the hardest times could last a lifetime.